you so much for joining our webinar today. Good morning, good afternoon, good night, good very late at night, depending on where you are in the world. So today we have from Sharon Barr, our co-founder and CEO, together with Lior Frimovich, Early's co-founder and CTO, and from ExpressoTS, Richard Zampieri, who will share how ExpressoTS uses EarlyAI to boost code quality. Feel free to ask questions. We'll answer them either written or later on, and enjoy the session. Sharon.
Thank you so much, Adi, and thank you, Richard and Lior, as well for joining me here. So today, what we'll do is we'll talk quickly, about introduction, who we are. We'll talk a little bit about Early. I'll show you a quick demo of how Early is being used, and then we'll switch for the interesting part where Richard will talk about ExpressoTS, introduce it, and talk about how they use it, and then we'll leave time for questions, and we'll just get started. So, if this was a session where I could see, you could see me, I could see you, I would ask who likes unit tests, and why we are going to talk about why unit tests. But let's start first, talk about the problem. And the problem is that, if you take the example of CrowdStrike, a tiny bug led to a massive crisis, where for those of you who read the lesson learned, it was an out-of-bound array exception that caused null pointer exception, blue screen of death, and the highest cost of bug ever. Some say over $40 billion losses. And that's what happened when bug slips through to production. And if you try to analyze the situation, right, if you look at how the cost of bug is rising through the development cycle, we can see that the cost is going up exponentially, where if you catch it during the development time, the cost is pretty low. If you catch it post-production, you get massive loss of sleep, for everybody, from engineers to the CEO, and obviously huge loss of money. So testing is something that most people don't like doing, but it's obviously essential. And if you do it right, and if you could do it right, then it would save a lot of pain and grief, and actually can help you focus on building quality software. So in order to do testing, that we have to understand a little bit about, the different types of testing. And we'll start with functional testing. Unit test usually you do at the beginning, component integration, during development, you user acceptance testing, system testing closer to release, sometimes after release. You have functional, non-functional testing, security, performance, localization, usability, manual testing, all types of manual testings, automated testing that you do throughout the process, including CI/CD, white box testing, black box testing, and whatnot. So the question is, as developers, as leaders, where should we invest our time on when we want to test our software? Where is the best return on investment, right? And how can AI tools change that landscape? And ideally, what if you could catch all the bugs during coding? And that brings us to unit testing, right? And the question is, again, what are the benefits of unit tests, and why should we start with them if we can? Because, as we saw earlier, that's where the cost of bug is the lowest. And if you manage to catch it during development, it really saves a tons of time. Unit tests are actually being developed by developers. There are different type of personas, from QA engineers to leaders and whatnot, that are doing manual testing, that are doing different elements of testing. But unit tests are usually part of your code. And if you manage to take that away from developers, you are freeing them their time to do higher level tasks, more complex software, focus on what brings value to the business, the application. And clearly, if the cost of bug is low, then the speed of releases is high, because you're spending much less time on bugs, more time on getting the software out or increasing the scope. And there are many different use cases during development that we'll discuss. So this is a place where generative AI dev tools are here to help, trying to take away that pain from developers. So we'll jump quickly into Early, and I'll do a quick demo, but just at the higher level, Early is an extension on VS Code extension that you install. Once you install, you generate the tests. I'll show you in a minute. And when you get the test, you review them. You get green unit tests, red unit tests. There are different features that I will show you how to automatically generate unit tests, how easy it is to navigate between the tests and find them, how to test your pull request, right? All the code that you are changing, how can you increase the coverage for that test? How you get, the outcome is high coverage in a click, and other features like suggesting documentation and improvement for the codes, basically everything that helps you improve the quality of the code. It's not about the test, it's about the code. So what used to take hours now will take minutes. So before I'll jump into the demo, I'll just show you one example of a method that will go through the demo. It's a real method actually from our code on the backend, check max number of user settings. Basically, we are getting an input of a user count and a user, and the goal is if the user count is below a max number of users, we return the answer. So if the user exists, we return. Otherwise, we check the user count, and if the max number is above the user count, then we throw an exception. So if I go to the demo, what I will do here, let me just clean some of the screens. I'm using sorry, let me just reset some stuff of the demo. So what we are seeing over here is Cursor. For those of you who are familiar with it, Cursor, sort of like a co-pilot, but it's integrated into the IDE. The Cursor team took Visual Studio Code, forked it, and built a more tuned IDE for AI, where Early is an extension within the VS Code marketplace. So you go and install it, same way you do it on Visual Studio Code. Once it's installed, you can see the extension. You can configure different things like whether you want the test format in Jest or in Mocha, what format the files goes out, where do you want the test files, in what format the file names, etc. And then we look at the extension. What we see over here is all my methods, all the code that is testable, if you will. So you can see a file named user service, a class user service, and if I click on the checkmarks service, I'm actually jumping to the method that I showed you earlier. The other things I can see here are the unit tests that are already exist for the particular files and the coverage for these unit tests. What I will do here is I will delete some of these tests that we had generated previously. We'll go back to Early, and if I click on this button over here, what we do is we are refreshing the coverage based on the existing unit tests that we have. We are using, standard tools under the hood, like Istanbul. And what you see, by the way, if you look at the entire project, we are around 83% coverage. All the tests were generated using Early. And once I refresh the coverage for user service, the coverage dropped from 100% to 54%, 37% for the class, and 0% for these three files where I deleted the the tests. So now in order to use Early, I can basically generate tests. So I can generate tests by clicking on the magic wand, if I click over here, or if I go to the method, there is a code lens above the method name. Once I click on the method name or generate the test, I get a window over here that we call Earl. Earl is like your AI test engineer, and it's here to help you increase the quality of your code. It shows you the method documentation. So what I can see here, this is the recommendation of what documentation you should have. If you click insert, it will go above the method and will help you understand the method in the future. There is some code improvements, for example, max number of users, what we've seen over here. So the recommendation is, you better cache it rather than go and retrieve it. And once the tests are generated, you can see an icon over here, and you can also see go to test code over here. So this is where the tests that were generated, basically, this is all new. And when we are ready, then we can see the coverage of the new files that was generated. And we can see that the files we generated tests for over here jump to 100%, and this one is 57%. But these tests that if you look at them are, if you look at the checkmarks number, we can see that the test has, let me extend the screen over here. We can see that the test has mocks over here. So we know how to catch everything that goes out of the method and create mocks for this. The test has happy path and edge cases. In fact, what I have here is an extension, a Jest UI extension where I can actually see the tests that are running. So those will be all the tests that we generated. And what we'll see over here is that whether they're all green or red, and one thing that is interesting, we can see that there are some red tests over here. And red test is an interesting element. So if I go back over here, I can see that for get user or create, I have a coverage of 57%. I click on it. And why is it 57%? Because I actually have a few red tests. So if I run them over here, I can see which ones are red. This is an interesting point because while Early is an AI agent, and by AI agent, it means that with a click, we are doing almost everything that you need in order to have good tests that are running. But in cases that AI agents are not successful, like this one, whether we get red test, and red test could be because of a bug on the code, or sometimes it could be because of a technical problem. In this particular case, basically we generated an object that is missing some properties. So this is a case where I can let AI try to fix it. So if I click accept, I can see that AI basically created a mock that is actually fitting what we need over here. If I click run on the tests, the test become green. If I click refresh on the coverage, I will see that the get user or create, let's see the coverage now that this green test, that this red test became green. So 100%, and we can see that now we have 100% coverage for user service, 86% coverage for the entire project. So if you just summarize, the goal of an AI agent is that you don't need to come and explain to the AI, this is a method, this is what I want you to do. Everything happens in a click. In addition, there are other elements that can help you understand your code and improve the code. And I will let Richard talk about a few more use cases that are very interesting. So I won't steal the show for him, but this is the gist of what EarlyAI is. So Richard, I will pass it for you, and then at the end I will do closing notes.
Okay, so I'm gonna jump from the steps that we already introduced ourselves. It's just you can find information about ExpressoTS on the X handle ExpressoTS and the website ExpressoTS.com. On the ExpressoTS.com, you're gonna find a video that explains what the project is. But basically, ExpressoTS is a backend framework for developing highly maintainable APIs or backend services on inside of Node.js ecosystem. So curiosity about us is that we have 1.5 years after release, and we are the third most downloaded backend framework at the moment. So if I keep pushing over to already introduce myself, principal software engineer, creator of ExpressoTS, and some of the projects that I've been working on, including helping on creation of an ISO standard for autonomous systems for the mining industry. If I jump this, you can find me on GitHub with this handle right here, RSAZ, in case you want to get in touch and see what we're currently building in there on ExpressoTS. These are the contributors that are, either some of them are current, some of them are past, but I, would love to highlight the work that they have contributed to ExpressoTS and make what the ExpressoTS is today. So ExpressoTS has fundamentally 4, big pillars. So we are a framework that allows you to have 2 different templates, 2 different approaches of developing applications. Usually developers don't like an opinionated form of developing applications. So we also have a weekly opinionated template in which you basically author our libraries and you have the flexibility to create your application in your own way. So the framework is very modular. We follow all the best practices, obviously, for having a enterprise level application. You have to have proper documentation, quality, and so on. And the framework is very extensible. So we can, users can create providers, and those providers can be inserted into the framework ecosystem in a very easy manner using the plugin pattern. So here are the 6 components that compose a framework. In general, if you look into this, every single framework in the market, Spring Boot in Java, .NET Core, Laravel, Django, so they basically follow the same principles with the slightly nuances or different implementations of those components. So I'm not going to go into detail because this is not the purpose of this meeting. It's just to give you like a high-level introduction of what ExpressoTS is. If you're curious, go and look at our website and give us a star on GitHub as well. I appreciate that. So basically we have a DI container in which it's responsible for providing the instances to your class, avoiding coupling between objects. We have a file that defines the global configuration of your application. Usually people spend a lot of time thinking, where should I initialize my database? Where should I shut down this service and so on? We have actually a file for this, very similar to the approach that .NET has. So with the class program, the class startup, we have controllers. Controllers are just a way of users communicating with your application. Most of the frameworks nowadays, they use the concept of services. I don't like that concept. We use use cases because align very much with the UML. So someone that's actually getting out from the uni, so they're already very familiarized with the concept, which is basically processing that payload that came from the controller and processing the information and providing that return back to the controller. So use cases basically implement the functionality. Providers are just all the satellite applications across or features that extend or improve the user experience within the framework. So for instance, if you're in a website and you're making a registration of your user, and so the main use case for this is you're submitting the payload of probably your username, your email, and password. That's the main use case, but providers allows you to, for instance, once the user is registered, you can get an email back and say, hey, your user was registered successfully. All those little satellite applications can be inserted. And the application work with the module concept. Modules are basically a way of you electronically or digitally organize your application. So you can have a module user, and inside of user, you can have all the controllers related to the user. So I'm going to fast forward to for the open source part. So I'm not going to go through every single detail of these 6 pillars. As I said, we could have another session for this, but the focus is explaining about quality. And so this is, before I jump to quality, this is the overall architecture of the framework. So you have a main entry point of the application, you have a container. So the container can have multiple modules. Those modules are a way for you to, as I said, to organize your application. And a module can have one to many controllers, and obviously controllers can be an MVC pattern. You can have one controller with multiple endpoints or just one controller with one use case. And that use case can have several repositories or one repository and several providers. So, but actually, the real challenge we're trying to resolve with the new framework on the Node.js ecosystem, business responsiveness, rapid prototyping, consistency. So with ExpressoTS, we're really proving some organizations are currently using. So the speed on the development, it's incredible. The way you onboard new developers to the framework it's also super quick, because the way the project is structured and streamlined, it's really easy for you to understand and anyone to pick it up what's going on with the code. But let's talk about open source, right? So ExpressoTS, it is an open source project, and by the fact that that is an open source project, so we need to have basically as a sustainable pillars 4 major blocks here. One is, in order for a new company to incorporate ExpressoTS as part of the development process, so the framework needs to, or the library needs to have a certain number of downloads, has to have a good documentation, has to have a secure environment, so all the patches and dependencies on the dependency tree are secure, and also a good code coverage. Obviously, code coverage is the result of you investigating the issues you have in your application or testing your application, and that's the pillar we're going to be focusing on right now related to our discovery. So obviously, as we are open source, and probably some of the enterprise organizations, some companies will relate to this, we face these challenges. So for ExpressoTS, by the fact that we are an open source organization, is we have resource constraints. We developers that doesn't follow the same rigor when implementing the code of the application and the unit tests, and this is a reality. So as we are working on open source, we don't have the time to afford on looking to test, and usually these are the sentiment of some organizations as well. So some organizations, even they underestimate the power of or the value of the QA. There are certain cultural factors that blocks IT departments to invest on quality. So they just start investing in quality when they actually get an issue outside. But for us in open source is I have a certain amount of resources dedicated to implement functionalities, and I don't have the time to afford in QA. I decided to look for a tool that actually allow me to implement unit tests really quick. So first I started using directly ChatGPT, but my problem with ChatGPT was I was copy and paste a lot of code from my code base to give to the ChatGPT context, and that was very time consuming. I was taking like 10 to 15 minutes for one single test to try to figure out copying context all over and try to figure out what I should be implementing. And I decided, well, it's better for me to implement this manually because it's not working. I'm spending more time copy and paste content. So then I found EarlyAI. I mean, I think it was right on time that we were pushing the boundaries of the framework. And I said, let me take a look on this library, on this component inside of the VS Code. One of the cool parts of working with the extension was how easy it was to set up. We were already using Jest, as a framework, as a testing framework, which made things easy. I just installed the extension. It captures my Jest configuration immediately. I actually did some adjustments in terms of what I would be considering as part of the code coverage or not. And then I just start selecting the test that I would like to generate the unit tests. I think this is super handy by the fact that you have an extension that lists all the unit tests, all the functions or methods that you want to test, and you just click a button. With that click, it copies the context of you would be probably copying manually. So it does automatically for you. So it actually gave me time to reflect in some other things rather than actually the unit test itself. So these other things that I spent most of time was try to investigate if what type of bug insights I got from the test generated. Also, as a result of using this automated tool, I was able to big portion of my code base inside of ExpressoTS was automatically generated and was passing. I just have to go through minimal changes to make sure that some of those changes were very related to what I was actually aiming for to test. Another cool part was instead of, again, using a generative AI such as Gemini or maybe ChatGPT, copy and paste my function to say generate the doc, I was able to copy the doc from the URL, which is a tool inside of Early. Really handy as well. It's already on VS Code. You don't need to get out of VS Code. It gives me a lot of advantage on that sense in terms of how quickly I got things tested. This was my process. It was very easy actually to engage with the extension. So here's an example that our code base is not small. One of the libraries has approximately 9,000 lines or 10,000 lines, just one library. There's a bunch of other libraries that compose the framework. But here's an example of inside of one of our libraries, I'm highlighting this particular service here. And what I want to highlight in here is that some of the questions that I got when I was actually having conversations with a couple of developers before this meeting was, how efficient is the agent on generating complex use cases, and those complex use cases where you have a method that you have other objects inside of this particular method that refers to other classes and so on, how the agent was efficient in getting the context of everything. So I will respond this into the next slide for you to actually see how efficient it was in terms of passing tests and failing tests. So here we have an example of a function inside of a class compiler, a function called getService, in which I just press a button and waited for generating the test. So this function is basically do a dynamic import of TS node. and out of the TS node generate a compiler object from service inside of a Node.js class and return that object. So when I create the generate test, I was expecting at minimum to generate the validation of the object. If the object that was created by this function was the object that I was expecting, and that object has the configuration that inside of the hasher that I was expecting as well. So when I click and generate the test, I actually got a few highlights, not just on the happy path saying, hey, here's the instance that you're expecting, but also, so the test gave me insights of what if we ensure if this the singleton pattern inside of this class for this particular service is guaranteed. So it kind of like broadened my thoughts on what I should be testing. So that for me that was fantastic, because there is a huge skip of my mind on relaxing, and I don't need to care about those things anymore, and I just trust on AI. And I'm not saying to you that I trust in AI 100%. What I'm saying is that I was confident enough to see the code generated and testing. I was able just to spend time reviewing if that makes sense to the functionality that I was actually aiming for. So out of this entire process, a code base of approximately 9,000 lines. So we were able to generate 206 tests. So if I was actually doing this manually, I would spend more than a month or even more. And I was able to do this in a couple of hours. The coverage that we have as a result of this was 89%. And what I think was more fascinating for me is that out of this 206 tests, we have 23, almost 10% of those tests was actually failing. And those failures sometimes were issues of the agent, but the majority of those times were issues through my code. So instead of me mechanically implement the unit test, I was able to spend time on actually reviewing the real bugs or improvement opportunities I had in my code. And that was the result of this entire process. Just for you guys to have a better view of this, I just generated prior to this meeting a quick snapshot of our code base. And as you can see, test 206, test suites 51, most of them 100% code coverage, all the tests running really fine, 89% of those tests. And to a click of a button, I click generate tests, generate the test for me. I'm able to investigate those tests, see if those tests make sense, see if they are actually corresponding to what I was expecting, and boom, a couple of hours, almost 90% of code coverage. So that's pretty much the way we approach using EarlyAI. I think was an amazing adventure of not spending time on unit tests, but just spending time on actually improving the code quality through the results of unit tests. Is a different way of thinking. Yeah, that's it from my side. Thanks, Sharon.
Thank you so much, Richard. It was pretty fun watching it from my side as well. Can I grab the screen again? I think
yes.
You need to unshare. Thank you. So what we've seen is, I think one thing that struck me when I listen to Richard is it's actually even a new use case that we didn't think about. So if you try to summarize how using early and AI dev tools for unit testing can be done, then we at least thought about few use cases until we listened to Richard. One is continuous testing during development. So test early and test often. You write code, don't wait, generate tests, improve the code. Second is test your pull request. So you write a lot of methods before you're ready to merge. Maybe one thing I didn't show over here is you can see my code and you can see my changes. When you look at my changes, we show you only the code that changed. And this is the code that we just wrote, for example. And say, for example, if some of what we've seen earlier, if some of the methods don't exist, then you will see here 0%. Actually, if I just take a simple example over here, let's say I'm adding another method. Let's call it 1, get user by ID 1, and let's refresh it. So we need to get, I think, inside and out. And you can see now there is get user by ID 1. It's a new method. Coverage is 0. I can generate test, and the coverage should go up. Again, going for the same process. So the goal over here is really to help me improve the quality of my newest code. Testing private methods, it's more of a way that we are thinking about it. Testing all the edge cases of your code, if you have a component test or even integration test, is pretty painful and expensive. In order to get to every branch, you have to have very detailed tests at the top level. And one way to test every edges, especially if you're talking about private methods, is to maybe encapsulate them. So make them public, generate tests, test them thoroughly, return them to become private. You can delete the test or skip the tests, but at least you manage to increase the quality of those private methods. The fourth one is in fact something that summarizes all of those, and what Richard mentioned is through the test generation, Richard was able to reflect on his code and actually find issues, whether Early found the bugs or not. They helped Richard think together by generating the test, thinking, wait, there is another thing, and improving the code. And that ultimately the goal of Early, not about the test. The test are just means to the end. The end is really help you create quality code. And final one, we haven't talked about it, TDD. There is a blog on our website if you want to read about it, how you can do TDD, test-driven development, differently, where you write the method header, you can generate test. Actually, Early can get enough information, generate test, especially if you can even comment the methods. The test will fail, you start implementing, the test start passing. Now we have more information, so you continue generating more tests. Now you get more edge cases that are failing, you enhance the code, and so on and so on. So really try to take away from developers the things that they like less, which is writing the test, and they leave them with the things they like most, which is building the applications. So that brings us to conclusion. And if there are any questions, then feel free to write them on the chat. But
Connect us.
Yeah, obviously, yeah, sorry, let me, so let's see, are there any questions? Anyone from the audience? Good. Richard, do you have anything else to add on your side?
I think one of the examples I maybe have missed is, so I remember that when I was actually generating the test, I had a function that has a couple of mandatory fields in that function, and one of those mandatory fields was a string parameter. So if it is mandatory, so when you're actually invoking or calling that function, you need to pass the parameter, which is a string. So, but I wasn't actually thinking on validating if someone actually passed an empty string. So when I generated tests, so the tests failed in one particular item, in one particular unit test on the edge case, and say, hey, you're not validating if in case of someone passing an empty string. This is one of the things that I was saying before, and I want to emphasize is, rather than you just spend time mechanically, you get for instance, you get a method that receive two parameters, sum two numbers, and return the result of that two sum. Rather than you mechanically create a test that validates if the sum of two parameters are 2, you're actually reflecting or spending time validating if the parameter is correct, if someone passed a parameter with a different type, if someone cast information before passing a parameter, and other things, or if the return is right, if the object that was created inside is right. So that was a really red test or a positive approach, I would say, that, or insight that you can get when you automatically generate testing. You don't spend time on manually creating the unit test, because when you put energy in something, you don't get other energy left to spending more time on that something. So you just want to get it done. So if you have a tool like this that gets stuff done for you, and you're just on the side of validating to what was created, I think it's super helpful, and you can build things quickly. As you said, the focus for companies or for open source organizations are building the product and delivering functionalities to the customer. So that's the last point I would like to add that I missed, I guess, in the presentation.
Thank you, Richard. Just before we wrap up, I encourage you to go to our website. You can read about different use cases. Today we uploaded through 3 new blogs. One is talking about comparison between Cursor and EarlyAI. Another one is what is an AI assistant versus an AI agent. And a third one, we introduced EQS, Early Quality Score, which talks about how we evaluate tests, something that is above code coverage. It helps us evaluate our technology and the quality of our test and get to the results that Richard mentioned. And I think we'll wrap up with that. If no one else has anything else to share, let me stop sharing my screen.
Thank you so much for joining.